What's going on, everyone? Today we have a little bit of a fun video for you today. We're going to be talking about academic hot takes. This is going to be based off of a Twitter thread I saw recently. We're going to read some people's hot takes, react to them, comment on them. A caveat that we're going to have to maybe keep bringing up is that, depending on how particular these end up being, is that academia... From the outside looking in, the systems across different countries look very, very similar. But the way things are run on the inside, the way things are achieved on the inside, for example, things you have to do to earn your PhD, all of these things are subtly or even completely different across countries. And so we might get some localized hot takes that don't quite apply to the systems that I've been in. Also, there's going to be unique problems with different fields. I'm a physicist, so I can mostly comment on problems that come up in physics. All right, so first up, not all PhD supervisors have your best interest at heart. So this is unfortunately really true. There have been people that I've heard about, unfortunate stories where at the end of the day, PhD students were sort of drones to do or help with the supervisor's research. Not all supervisors do have your best interests at heart. Unfortunately, this is why you have to do your homework, and you have to treat, interviewing for your PhD also as a interview for your supervisor. You're interviewing them. Spending 4 years of your life with somebody who's not going to value you, grow you as an individual, etc., Unfortunately, this is quite true. I love the next one. You don't need to read papers. So I don't think that this is true when you're getting into a field, but I think that, maybe this person is in a little bit more of a privileged situation. Basically, what happens is eventually, once you get more and more used to the field, you're kind of aware of open problems. And as open problems get solved, they naturally get brought to your attention. Like, people are going to be talking about them. You see them on Twitter and so on. And so, maybe browsing archive isn't as important as it was, when you were less experienced. That being said, I do have to say that this is sort of maybe a privileged position. And this is also one of the reasons why lesser known groups don't get as many citations, because oftentimes once you get, into a field, what that ends up meaning is who to pay attention to for innovations in the field, and then papers can slip through the cracks. So I definitely recommend, you should still be browsing archive. That's a physics and math thing it's a preprint thing. And you should be paying attention to physics that's interesting. Maybe you don't have to, read every line, and maybe you just read abstracts, conclusions, look at plots, and so on. But yeah, I agree. Paper reading probably isn't as important as people say it is. Academia isn't that bad. It has positives and negatives like any other job or field. So I think the payoff at the end of academia is really cool, getting to be financially secure and being able to work on things you're really, really passionate about that may or may not have monetary value. That is certainly very cool. There are some very distinct downsides. I think the thing that's really unique about academia is how unique the downsides are. But I guess I have to somewhat agree with this. It's just apples to oranges between academia and industry. It's just not the same. This one, I don't think it's super relevant for physics, but let's talk about it. There is way more academic fraud and data fabrication than people realize. My guess is that there's a very small fraction. A very small fraction is actually caught, usually when it's very blatant or in high-profile papers. So we know that there was a room temperature superconductor claim recently. Those people, that claim was debunked. There's also been other things in the field where, you know, relatively or actually extremely strong claims have been made, and, you know, a decade or two of experience has been dedicated to these claims, where these claims ended up not being true. In physics recently, in the many-body physics space, or at least they're not as true as originally thought. They're not as robustly true. I don't know if I want to go into that story, but I would say in physics, like, things are caught pretty quickly on the scale of academia, unless the question is extremely difficult. Like, if there's some conjecture that people catch wind of that's extremely difficult to verify, sometimes people can take that conjecture and make it feel like and use it in such a way that it's useful to do next steps in research. But data fabrication, I think, is extremely rare. It would be extremely hard to fake, at least in theory. So I feel like this is probably I feel like this is probably not a good take for physics. This person is probably from some other field. Because we know what we expect reality to do, right? So surprising papers are when surprising things happen, and then once surprising things happen, then it's time to have a lot of extra investigation. So any time you fabricate data, you're probably spiking a lot of interest. Far too much research is in service of careers/ideology, not in service of science and innovation. I feel like this is probably not a good one for physics. Well, I feel like so in my field, there's this whole debate of generic behavior versus fine tuning. This does seem to have sort of like a philosophical split in the community. So there are philosophical or ideological camps in physics. You hear a lot about that in the high energy world with like string theory as well. Like, scientists do get into camps and ideologies or philosophies or ways to progress, basically. But whether or not physics sort of falls into the thing of, this is at the detriment of science is sort of another point, because I think that what ends up happening in these philosophies, at least in my experience and in my field, is that these are just different ways of making progress. And so, like, any sort of like interpersonal conflict that arises because you fall into one camp or the other is kind of just pointless bickering, because both camps are making progress in their own way in different directions that are complementary. Academia ruins critical thinking. That is blatantly incorrect. Making plots in Excel is actually fine. I feel like there's a lot of tribalism going on between like what people use to data process or even like program. I feel like some people tried to sort of make fun of others, like at a recent summer school that I went to, about what programming languages they used. And really, at the end of the day, it's like, does this tool does it solve the problem that I want to solve? And if the answer is yes, then who cares? Like, I don't use C++ to be an elitist. I use C++ because the questions that I usually answer, especially in this next paper that's coming up, it's like these questions are unanswerable unless I spend a lot of time really working on the efficiency of my code. Like, I'm gonna put this code up on 40, 80 CPUs, maybe a terabyte of RAM, and then after 7 days of that, potentially I can get an answer. And if I can't get an answer because my code was too slow, then that's something I need to work on, right? But if you don't have those requirements and Python is enough, or MATLAB or Mathematica, then you should be using those tools, because C++ is inaccessible. unless there's a library that does exactly what you need it to do. Here's an interesting one that I don't think really works for physics, and that's books are greater than papers. So a really good example of why this isn't true is that in my space, and you can look on my YouTube channel for this. Maybe YouTube is better than books in this case as well. Is one of the most important concepts to know in many-body physics right now, or quantum many-body physics anyways, is the eigenstate thermalization hypothesis. There really isn't a book dedicated to it. I know the Pathria book for statistical mechanics briefly mentions it, but it doesn't mention it in a way that's, you know, robust enough to say that you should go read Pathria to learn eigenstate thermalization. No, you should read review papers. So modern topics in a field that moves relatively quickly, yeah, this tape just doesn't work. Maybe in more slow moving, fields, maybe this is true. Misplaced comments that don't really add much to the conversation. Prestigious universities do not necessarily produce good scholars, colleagues, or teachers/mentors. So there's a little bit of a snowball effect in terms of somebody's success in physics, and this doesn't really say, it doesn't potentially say anything about them. Like going to a good school, maybe not for undergrad, maybe for undergrad. You know, you're getting exposed to, you know, these schools have the money and the prestige to attract the best the best scholars, right? And not only that, they typically have very big departments. So, you know, if you have a department with 20 professors, their expertise is going to span, you know, something that looks approximately like the whole physics space. But as you get into the more nitty gritty and how diverse, you know, a field like condensed matter physics is, for example, like if you have one condensed matter physicist in your department, they can teach to undergrads and to grad students condensed matter physics, right? The thing is that if you then go to a school that has 20 condensed matter physicists, all of those people will do different subdisciplines, right? So going to prestigious universities, good universities for your field, typically exposes you to a lot more information and a lot more opportunities in different fields. You know what's out there. You know, as an undergraduate or a graduate student, it's difficult to know what's out there. So there is a little bit of a snowball effect, you know, sort of also if it's a good university in terms of opportunities, you're going to get more you're potentially going to get more opportunities than other universities. And so good opportunities, unfortunately, do produce good scholars. It doesn't mean you need all of these same opportunities to be a good scholar, but yeah, good colleagues or teachers/mentors, that's a different. That's a completely different qualification. Like that, just, you know, when I say good scholar, I mean like they're probably putting out impactful research. Good colleagues, teachers, or mentors, that's a completely different ballgame, and really it comes down to, you know, the quality of the person and how much they value the relationships in their lives. So all papers should be required to submit anonymously, and breaches of this on any part of the process should result in publishing timeouts. There are many great papers not published because they are missing a famous name or don't come from a top university. I don't have an issue with this. It's too bad that, you know, people think that this is, and unfortunately it probably would be something that's helpful. There are journals that do this, and then there are journals that are much more open. I think both are good. Like, I think existing in a space where there's prestigious journals that do both is probably something that I would prefer. But I can definitely see where this person is coming from. Journal access should be free to everyone. So there is a movement by a lot of folks to make this true. Yeah, journals in physics are sort of a hot topic right now, you know, behind closed doors, in the sense that, you know, I don't know, like there's really no perfect, there's unfortunately no really perfect solution for sort of the scientific process, peer review and stuff like that, right? Because, you know, people don't pay peer reviewers, even if they are paid journals. even if the journal is making money, they don't pay peer reviewers. Editors might make money depending on the situation, but for the most part, it's a volunteer service. And because of that, I mean, post-COVID, people like getting papers through, or getting papers just to the point where you get referee reports. I mean, like, timelines are ridiculous right now. Like, it definitely looks different now, and there's a lot of conversations about what the best way to do it is. Unfortunately, I don't really think there is a real good answer that is sort of universally true. But I do agree that there should be more openness and access to articles. The vast majority of academic articles and books are meaningless, repetitive drivel full of unintelligible jargon, and they do it on purpose to maintain their separation from non-academics. So absolutely disagree. Absolutely disagree. Most jargon sounds unintelligible because you don't know what it is. Like, jargon shortens conversations for experts. I should not have to use 20 words of description to tell a colleague about something that we talk about every single day and can put into one silly little jargon word. It's not to maintain separation from non-academics, but listen, like, science, research, like, these things are complicated. Shortening things into jargon is extremely helpful for efficiency of communicating ideas. Like, unfortunately, like, that puts a barrier to outsiders. But at the same time, I mean, like, especially if you're in a very mathematically inclined, or like a very, actually every field probably, like, most academics are dealing with levels of abstraction and difficult concepts where, I mean, most people off the streets would need to be provided a lot of context to appreciate what they see in articles. Like, articles aren't written for the public, they're written for scientists. And then it's the job of scientific communicators later to communicate these ideas. When PhD programs require no formal training in either teaching or administration, academics cannot generally be competent in teaching or administration. I agree. Like, it's very clear that at least in the areas that I've worked in, that the point is research, right? Everyone's there for research. Teaching is secondary. It's important to teach. There's a lot of people that really prioritize and love teaching, but even those people, a lot of times, like, teaching is secondary, and that's a fact of university. And I've seen sort of people recommending, ways to get around that, but unfortunately, it's very clear that people that are making decisions, teaching is a secondary priority for a lot of professors. There is no such thing as useless degrees. Majority of careers do not even specify beyond any bachelor's degree preferred. I agree with this basically, like as one of the other hot takes tried to say to the contrary, like, basically university should teach you how to think. And it's, and I would say, based off of talking to different people, every single program, and when I say learning how to think, I'm not saying, you should be it's indoctrinating. What it is it's teaching you how to critically think. It's teaching you how to critically read literature a lot of the time. Think about the author's, intentions. What type of sources are they using? Teaching you how to do research and form your own opinions based off of, the context of information you have, right? So I would say that is always valuable. Of course, there's always going to be degrees that immediately lead into more prosperous careers, and that's a debate that people have and they like to, bang their drums for. But I agree. Like, I think critical thinking is pretty crucial. And so I basically agree with this, but I also think that you should think about your economic situation. Unfortunately, we don't, or at least, coming from Canada and Ontario, it's not as crazy as some of the tuition fees that I see in the United States, but I mean, tuition in Ontario is quite expensive. So you should also be thinking about your economic situation. Most of the academic events, conferences, panel discussions, symposiums are done only to check boxes and secure better increments, and not to genuinely further academic discussion. So I sincerely disagree with this. So for example, okay, I guess that, so their claim is most, and I'll basically name two things that are, that sort of, in my field anyways, become the most, right? So there's workshops and summer schools that are basically the same thing. These are long programs that are going to expose you to a lot of different topics and what's going on in the field. Science, isn't some, soulless, objective, truth-seeking program. It is very social. You need to understand what other people are thinking about and what other people find interesting. And so, and why they find it interesting, right? Because people usually have really good reasons for why they do their research. So a lot of the social aspects can be underestimated by people. You need to go talk to people. You need to hear about their research. And these longer programs are a really good chance to get exposed to them in an introductory way, because instead of having, just a 1 hour talk, this person will have, maybe 5 1-hour talks, and they can actually structure it, introduce motivation, cover some key technical aspects that are difficult to get past, and so on. So those things are certainly not a waste of time. I did 2 of them over the summer where I was in a specific place for a month. The next one is conferences, where these talks are a lot shorter, but they're also really useful. We talked about reading articles and papers. Well, a lot of the times you don't have the time to go into the technical detail to appreciate all the details of articles, or sometimes you can miss the point. And so some people aren't good at presenting their research, but typically, conferences that are a week or 2 weeks, this is another social chance to get, maybe exposed to a lot more research all at once, rather than more focused talks. And it's also really good to meet people in your field. This is how collaborations are born, right? So I don't know. I think this is a ridiculous take. Null results, replication, data, and code transparency are more important than the latest groundbreaking paper. So null results, I actually, I guess it depends on what they mean by this, but basically, from my understanding, there's a lot of fields that really have, every field has publish or perish, basically. But there's fields where if you get nothing, even after a year's worth of work, where you're basically saying does this method work to do X? And if the answer is no, you can't publish. And this can cause a lot of stress. This is very much a biochemistry type problem. And so I definitely agree with this. Data and code transparency. Data transparency, absolutely. Not a lot of people share their code because most people in physics write terrible code. And code transparency wouldn't really do anything. But I agree, more transparency all around. I think a lot of physics papers are a little light on explaining how they achieve something in their code. You might hear something like, we used DMRG, density matrix renormalization group, with these parameters, right? Well, it's even with those parameters, even with those specifications, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and there's a lot of different ways to have numerically unstable results. So yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. Undergrad students, at least where I work, are babysat throughout their studies, a ticking time bomb for lack of independence. So this is not true in my experience in physics. I mean, typically by second year, students are really, thrown to the wolves, so to speak, in the sense that you're studying very difficult topics and you don't have a lot of support. Maybe there's a class of 20 people. There's a professor who has their own research, has things that they feel are better to do with their time than help you outside of like maybe their lectures, and then 1 hour a week, and then you have one TA whose most of their responsibilities is marking. Most of the time, these students are learning really tough concepts through limited resources, and limited resources in the sense of being babysat. Like I don't really think that this is the case in my experience in physics. Peer review is a reasonable system. So I think people. So peer review has like this weird place where if you see science communicators, they'll really hold up peer review as an amazing system, and it has a lot of merit. Like, don't get me wrong, but internal, you will find a lot of scientists who have a lot of frustration, right? So like you'll see on my I don't know, like some of the memes on the Discord channel, for example, where like I like to make fun of like reviewer B. And basically what that boils down to is that peer review, in some sense, right now is a little bit broken because peer reviewers, one, it's not incentivized to peer review, but we need it in your career. It's not clear how incentivized that is. Two, you're not paid directly for it, so no one wants to do it. Three, another issue is that because people don't want to do it, some reviewers do a really bad job, right? Like they don't really provide good feedback, or it's very clear from their report that they didn't really read the article. I mean, like I've been rejected for papers where I disagreed with other researchers on topics, and I found things that were contrary to their findings. And I've had my articles dismissed by reviewers by citing the papers that I'm directly, citing in my article as saying, like, we're finding things different from them, right? And then the reviewer will say, your results can't be true, and then we'll cite the papers that I am directly citing in my article being like, we are finding things that are to the contrary, or, we are, there's some type of disagreement between the language in these papers or the results in these papers. And so peer review is not a perfect system, but I do agree with this person is a reasonable system because there needs to be some type of barrier to be science, right? Like the way science works is that you usually do science in a culture like that has institutional knowledge for science. So you're working with other scientists as you get trained. The next step is you do reasonable science. People knowledgeable in the field will tell you if this is new science, and you write up an article. The first bit of peer review that you go through isn't through a formal system, at least in physics. You post it in an archive. People might give you comments once they see it on archive. Then you might fix your paper based off of feedback and criticisms from the wider community, if they're paying attention. Sometimes they're not. And you send it off to peer review. Then it's 2 to 3 people's job to then go through and really look for obvious problems, right? Either in your math, your data, your plots, your arguments. A lot of the time, what this ends up doing is it makes your research better, because all of these steps is different people with different motivations are criticizing your work. And if everyone goes in, with good intentions and does a decent job, then this seriously improves the quality of research. And just because it gets through the system and gets published, that doesn't mean that it's objective truth, right? Like, that's just not how peer review works. It's not a perfect system. Bad papers do get through this system. Good papers do get initially rejected through certain peer review processes. There's no better way to do it. I feel like as humans, we have a lot of things in our lives that it's like, you know, when you're actually dealing with a certain type of institution or like, you know, some typical process, it's like, wow, this is so annoying or boring or whatever. But then it usually comes down to like, well, how would you actually do this better because of all of these reasons? And yeah, peer review is just one of those. But that's it for today. I feel like this went on a little too long, but I hope it was like a little bit of an informative video, or at least entertaining video. But that's it for today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.